Good evening. Good evening and welcome to St. Anne's this evening, especially to all of our friends from HaShoah. We're so happy to have you with us tonight and to be able to host once again the HaShoah Remembrance service. And we are always grateful that you join us on this time and that we get a chance to join you. I want to, especially as we begin, just I'll start off by thanking everybody who's made it possible to be here this evening and just give some opening remarks. I especially want to thank Rabbi Dan and also Heather and Stephanie Holden, who have been responsible for placing and putting together the entire evening service. And I want to thank them especially. I want to thank Steve Dix, who will be sharing some remarks with us tonight. John Tablione, who will also be sharing with us Psalm 121 to help us to pray together. And Barry Riesenberg, who is in Israel. He's in Israel watching. I hope, Barry, you are with us, and I welcome all those of you who are watching and sharing with us by live stream tonight. And I especially want to thank the teens of both of our communities this evening for coming, and they are a focus of the evening, especially the panel discussion. Their faith and their future are a focus of what we are about this evening. And secondly, they'll be leading us especially in the remembrance of light. And they are Tamar, Gideon, and Mason from HaShoah, Kieran, Lindsay, and Colin from St. Anne's. So to all of you, I especially want to say thank you, welcome, and we begin together tonight in prayer. I want to especially welcome, and as I say, thank you for being with us tonight for what I consider a solemn and significant gathering to both remember the horrors of the Holocaust and pray for those who died in its reign of terror, those who live with its deep scars, and also to pray that the divine gifts of hope, peace, and understanding will continue to strengthen the foundations of our mutual relationship of friendship, fraternity, sorority, solidarity, and respect. Over the past year, our communities, our neighborhoods, our localities, and certainly our nation have seen a rise in the sin of anti-Semitism. Its effects have shocked us, brought us together in prayers for sanity and healing, and shown us the continuing need for each of our families of faith to recommit to forming ourselves, and especially our younger generations, to counter such violence of thought, word, and action, especially when such heinous acts of hatred have been found even in our schools, the schools our children and youth attend. How do we teach and model for them the heart language of knowledge and understanding, of wisdom and respectful dialogue? How do we open ourselves with them to receive the divine spirit of courage, to counter hatred with nonviolent but effective resistance? With a commitment now to keep our young people safe from all harm, we come together tonight to find and foster ways to safeguard their and our own adult minds and hearts, so that they may not be poisoned by the angry, hate-filled, ignorant thinking that is running sickly through the veins of the heart of our country. A few years ago, with the wonderful financial support of the men's group at HaShoah and both of our faith families' generosity, 7 youth of our combined communities along with Heather, Kelly, and I, went to Washington, D.C. to share our fellowship and our faith, and to learn together from the experiences of touring the Holocaust Museum. It brought all of us to tears to see what horrors hate can inflict, what courage and healing can be found even in the sting of its venom, and to learn the lessons of respect and understanding from sharing the stories that are part of the fabric of such troubling times. Lessons needed in every generation. I will not forget the care and respect each of our fellow travelers, especially our youth, brought to that memorable moment. And it is that gift which gives me hope tonight that what we do here may help all of us, but especially our younger generations, keep the light of truth, dignity, courage, hope, and mutual respect aflame for us to follow into the future together. And may the God who promises liberation from all forms of bondage free us from the shackles that hate and prejudice would enslave us with. And let us do all in our power to cooperate with God's freedom works. So I welcome you again tonight, and I'm going to turn you over, I believe, to Pat, who will be facilitating this evening and helping us to understand better how we can form ourselves in faith. Pat, I think.
So, Father.
Oh, we're going to have the lighting of the candles. But you know.
We light our candles by passing the light of memory and hope from one to another. Let us honor those whose lights were put out, whose dreams, hopes, and lives were snuffed out before they even lived, for the 1.5 million children.
We light a candle for the untold millions for whom there is no one to mourn, whose entire families were annihilated and who lie in unmarked graves.
We light a candle for those who stood upright while others were bending to unmoral will, for the righteous among the nations who risked and even gave their lives to help their fellow human beings.
We light a candle for the nearly 6 million Jews and for the non-Jews who perished in a planned system of human destruction, the scale of which had never before been ever imagined.
light a candle for those brave soldiers who liberated the camps, who carried the dead and the near dead in their arms to a kinder and more humane future, and for those who served with the Allied forces to put an end to tyranny and oppression.
We light a candle for those who live, even now, under the yoke of oppression, in places where the threat of genocide is real and ever present.
Good evening. I'm Stephen Dix, a member of Congregation Eitz Chaim and its men's club. Each year when I've delivered remarks on Yom HaShoah, I began by saying that we need to understand what the Shoah, the Holocaust, was. But if all we do is look at it as history, we're missing the point. It's necessary to understand it so we can see what's going on in our own times, so we can be aware of how it happened, so we can be aware if hauntingly familiar things are happening again. And I've said this is not solely with regard to anti-Semitism, that it's vitally important we understand how genocide can be perpetrated, how people who would never engage in despicable, blatantly inhumane conduct can nevertheless be brought to, if not directly participate, at least stand by idly while it happens. All it seems to take is to create enough fear, have it grow into anger, and then direct that anger into hatred, and have that hatred pointed at some other group. It doesn't matter if they're Jews, or Sunnis, or Shiites, or Tutsis, or Uyghurs, or Rohingya, or black, or brown, or LGBTQ, or in any way different from you, or me, or us, or them. But one thing that separates the Shoah from all the other genocides is an unusual confluence. In the Shoah, both the perpetrators and the victims were detailed record keepers. And in spite of there being some within our own government who would have preferred to keep it all quiet back at that time, there was one man, General Dwight Eisenhower, who insisted that his troops film and record the liberation of the concentration camps because, as he put it, the time will come when people will refuse to believe that this ever happened. In 2018, I spoke on Yom HaShoah about a new anti-defamation law that had gone into effect in Poland that was focusing on not allowing anybody, anywhere in the world, to suggest that the Poles were somehow complicit with Nazis in the Shoah. I concluded my remarks by saying, quote, "This law is providing cover for a lot of anti-Semitic behavior that was already on the rise. But seriously, it's not just in Poland either. Look around, and don't just look around in other parts of the world. You might just want to be taking a look here." Close quote. Well, two things about that. First, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began, Poland has taken in and protected thousands of Jews, and the chief rabbi of Poland, Rabbi Michael Joseph Shodrich, has said, "Who would have ever believed that Poland would be taking in and protecting Jews, considering how many Jews fled Poland into Ukraine during the time of the Shoah?" Second, here we are 4 years later in East Cobb, and we're going to be talking about the rise of anti-Semitism right here at home. But while we're doing that, please remember, it's not just about anti-Semitism. It's all about all hate that's based on some falsely induced fear that makes any of us willing to lash out at any group just because it's an identifiable group that someone is telling us we need to hate. I'm immensely proud to be a part of this program this evening, and tonight we will be engaging in a panel discussion, and our panel members, oh my goodness, our panel members. We're joined by Sam Olens, a member of my congregation, and a name that should be familiar to all of us as the former Attorney General of the state of Georgia, and just as importantly to us as residents of Cobb, the former chairman of the Cobb County Commission. And Sam has been actively engaged in many of the conversations with synagogues, other stakeholders, and the school district following the incident at Pope High School last fall. By Kelly Simpson, Life Teen Director here at St. Anne's, who works with many of the teenagers who've been seeing these acts of hate in their schools. We're joined by Julie Katz, the Associate Director of the American Jewish Committee's Atlanta office that monitors trends like these here in the area and around the country. And we're joined by Melody Penziger, a St. Anne's parishioner and a Pope High School parent who was directly involved in the follow-up of the Pope High School incident. And moderating the discussion is Pat Filatico, St. Anne's parishioner, whose leadership roles in both business and community affairs make her uniquely qualified to guide this evening's discussion. Needless to say, all of our panelists are intimately familiar with the issues surrounding this vitally important and troubling issue. So to return to my opening thoughts, where we need to keep in mind that remembering the Shoah is not just about history. Most unfortunately, this year, we do need to talk about anti-Semitism right here, right now. And it's now my honor and privilege to turn the mic over to Pat Filatico.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for your messages, and Father Ray for having us and the teens for setting the tone. I find it a uniquely important time for us to be gathered here tonight, a time in which there's great movements to silence thoughts that create discomfort. So I thank you all for being here tonight to welcome that discomfort so that we can all learn together to be better allies for any who feel other than. Thank you, panelists. We're gonna get started, and we're gonna get started with Sam. In Steve's opening remarks, he spoke of various movements to really create social justice in our society. In your role as an elected official, Sam, talk to us a little bit about what you saw in those movements and what's different about anti-Semitism.
So, do you want us sitting or standing?
You can, please sit. You can be comfortable. Can everyone see them? No. Yes.
I figured it was no.
Okay.
Okay. If only I was as tall as some of you, then, you know. So first I want to, thanks, yeah, I've dealt with this a couple times. First I want to thank the church. The history between our two congregations is really important. And that history actually becomes more and more important every year, it seems. So the whole idea of people in different faiths looking for what unites us rather than what divides us is more and more important. And when the rabbi comes up at the end, you'll notice that I even dress like him. You know, so we're used to these shticks, right? So we'll cover the perceived or alleged rise of anti-Semitism in East Cobb later. I don't think there's a rise. There's just social media. And when Pat talks about, you know, being elected or being a public official, look, the very first campaign sign I put up with a friend on Johnson Ferry Road in 1998, a woman went up to the two of us and said, "You know I can never vote for you because you don't love Jesus." That was sign number one. You know, when I ran for AG, I had a Facebook page against me because I wasn't Christian. Oh, by the way, it had a lot of followers. So, and this isn't new, it's just social media has more and more control.
I think the issue really with anti-Semitism is many people view Jews as white and privileged, which means they need no protection. So as a result of that, it's okay to go after it. So it's okay to say, we own the banks, we own the newspaper, we own everything that I don't own. So it's perceived as acceptable. We talk DEI. We talk DEI a lot in our country now, social justice. It does not include Judaism. I will always remember the time I went to a big shindig in Waycross and someone ran up to me and said, tonight we have 3 types of barbecue. All 3 are pork, but it's 3 types of barbecue, right? So if you look at the school systems, if you look at the state, they still have public meetings on Rosh Hashanah. They still have public meetings on Yom Kippur. It's 2022. We still have public meetings on the holiest days of the Jewish year. So the first thing I would respond with regard to Pat is social justice includes everyone but the Jews, which is a real problem because we ourselves do a pathetic job of speaking for ourselves because we're too big trying to speak for everyone else. So you'll find many members of the synagogue that are involved in the Black Lives Matter. They're very involved in the anti-Asian issues, the anti-Hispanic, the anti-LGBTQ. Where we're missing in action is anti-Semitism. And for many of us, it's because we're frankly afraid to go there. You know, last thing I'll say about politics, when I ran for AG, when the race just started, and I learned about the Facebook page, Conservative Christians from Max Wood, I literally had to sit down with my wife and say, dear, you agreed for me to run. This was a family decision. If every day I come home, you're going to be an emotional disaster due to anti-Semitism, let me drop out of the race now. I can't be throughout the whole state and come home and not have you healthy. And thankfully, my wife stopped looking at those sources. So I think, you know, once again, we're at the Church of St. Anne. The only way that you deal with anti-Semitism is, frankly, with a lot of help from our friends, such as the Catholic community.
Thanks so much, Sam. There were so many things that I took from what you talked about, but the last might be the courage of your wife to really take you at your word and say, okay, I have to not be upset about this all the time and stand up for you, and thank you for all you've done. So Julie, I'm going to ask you, give us a little bit about the trends of anti-Semitism. We woke up this morning, all of the news is talking about the trends, the polarization in our country. Talk about that at a macro level, but then also what's happening here in Atlanta.
Sure. So first of all, Sam, thank you for those remarks, and I want to touch on just a couple of things you said. The first being that oftentimes Jewish people aren't included in diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And I think that's because there's a lack of understanding about who Jews are. Most people perceive Judaism as just a religion, and of course it is a religion. It's a really beautiful, expansive religion. But Judaism is also a culture, and it's a people. And so if we start talking about ourselves as a people, I think we can promote understanding about who we are and some of the issues that we face, and also some of the great parts about our peoplehood. And the second thing I wanted to touch on is the fact that, yes, social justice is a big part of being Jewish, and we talk about it often, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. And yes, I agree that oftentimes Jews are afraid to talk about anti-Semitism, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I think we really need to hone in on the fact that we can be proud Jews and stick up for ourselves, and we can also stick up for the rights of others. So to answer your original question, Pat, I'll talk a little bit about the international anti-Semitism trends and then national and local. So actually this comes at quite an opportune time for this conversation, but Tel Aviv University just released a study about anti-Semitism trends around the world. And last year's anti-Semitism was some of the highest it's ever been, ever. So in the UK, anti-Semitic incidents tripled or doubled. In France, they increased by 1/3. In the United States, they doubled. And much of this was due to the conflict last year that happened between Israel and Hamas, and also because of COVID. So I'll get a little bit more into why that is in a later question, but the basis of it is that anti-Semitism is a huge problem, not just here in the States, but internationally. Here in the States, Jews compose 2% of the US population, but are the target of nearly 60% of religiously motivated hate crimes. 60%. Think about that for a second. So obviously this is a huge issue, and the reason that my organization, American Jewish Committee, exists, so we can educate people about anti-Semitism. And I'll talk a little bit about the State of Anti-Semitism Report that my organization does, that we release every year, and it asks for American Jewish perception of anti-Semitism and also surveys the general public about their perception of anti-Semitism. And the findings are that 9 out of 10 American Jews are extremely concerned about anti-Semitism. They found that nearly 1/4 of American Jews have experienced an anti-Semitic event in the past year. And the one that scares me the most, as both a professional working in this realm and as a Jewish person, is that almost 1/3 of American Jews will hide their Judaism out of fear for their safety. And that could be anything from wearing a kippah, which is the head covering for a man, or wearing a Star of David necklace, to wearing traditional Jewish clothing, maybe more modest Jewish clothing if you're a more observant Jew who dresses like that. And that's huge, because for those who aren't Jewish in the room, think about if your child was afraid to wear their cross. I mean, can you imagine? So this is kind of painting a picture of the state of anti-Semitism right now. And the last thing I'll discuss is the local effect of anti-Semitism. And what I want everyone to remember, to know here, is that there is not a single school district in Metro Atlanta that has not been affected by anti-Semitism. Every school district, almost every private school has had anti-Semitic events. So it's happening, it's real, it's here, and it's because of these trends that I've been describing.
Julie, I told my colleagues at work, the stat, that 2% of the US population are Jewish. And they said, that can't be. That just can't be. I know so many people who are Jewish. I have so many Jewish friends, right? But the reality is, and I know Sam was canvassing around the state, you can say that about Metro Atlanta, but probably the further and further out you go, you don't. So I'd ask you to actually follow up with one more thought. We talk about the danger of the Shoah is when good people stand by and do nothing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So why do good people stand back and do nothing? It's because of the bystander effect. Raise your hand if you know about the bystander effect. Okay, so the bystander effect is when you're in a group of people and something is happening that needs attention, and because you're in a group of people, you assume that someone else will handle it, or that it doesn't need to be your responsibility. So, for instance, when you're driving on the highway and there's someone stranded on the side of the road, and you don't stop because you say, well, there's 100 million cars, someone would stop to help this person. So I think this is a main reason that things like the Holocaust or other atrocities happen. And I think what we can do is we can start training our kids how to prevent being a part of the bystander effect. So when they're young kids, you can teach them that if there's a kid on the playground who hurt their knee, that they need to be the ones going up to that person, even if no one else is. And as they continue on in their adolescence and their journey growing up and being around other kids and developing that skill of kindness, to keep doing that, to keep intervening, and really, practicing it like a muscle, because we all know that you have to develop habits in order for anything to stick. So as parents and as mentors and people who care, that's really what we can be doing to prevent that bystander effect.
Thank you so much. So Melanie, last fall when the Pope incident occurred, you and some parents at Pope decided that you needed to take action. You couldn't just stand by. Tell us a little bit about the lessons you learned.
Sure. So as the details emerged of that day at Pope, which kind of started as a TikTok challenge, and there was a lot of things going on with destruction of school property and rats being brought into the school, and then ultimately the anti-Semitic messages that were written in the restrooms, several moms and I just decided that something needed to happen, and we needed to show the community that our students in our school was so much better than that. So we came together and we brainstormed, and we decided that bringing together the students, the parents, the community, and local faith communities to do a work day at the school and clean up and show that we all cared and that there was actually goodness out there. So we planned that event, and I think one thing that I learned in planning that event is I realized my own lack of consideration for other religious obligations. So when we planned the event, we planned it for a Saturday, and we sent out the invitations, and of course we were quickly called out because it was the Sabbath, so we had to go back and think about that, and we broke the event into an afternoon and an evening session after sundown so that we could include the Jewish community and others. And so that was really eye-opening to me that we didn't even consider that as we were planning.
A piece of awareness. It's just one more piece that allows us to work together. I'm going to pick on Julie again. So we know a lot of what happened at Pope and other places started with this TikTok challenge, and it escalated into an anti-Semitic activity. Sam talked about the impact of social media. Can you talk a little bit about what's behind the social media impact of escalating all of this?
What is social media not behind?
Yeah.
So first, I want to talk a little bit about the sources of anti-Semitism, because I think that's important context for understanding how it manifests on social media. We have anti-Semitism stemming from the far right, the far left, and religious extremism. I'm going to actually venture to say that these days I would almost describe it as anti-Semitism just from the right and the left, not even necessarily the far left. So I mentioned that a lot of the uptick in anti-Semitic events came after the conflict between Israel and Hamas last year. And that's directly because of social media. There were a lot of people posting on social media about the situation, and instead of acknowledging the vast nuance and complexities of the situation, they labeled Israel as the oppressor and people in Gaza as the oppressed. And obviously, it was a horrible, horrible situation, and anytime innocent lives are lost, it is heartbreaking, and we should all acknowledge that horrible loss of humanity. But the issue is that whenever there's incidents happening in Israel, and the situation is portrayed that way, Jews around the world are targeted. And so we actually saw an uptick in violent anti-Semitic attacks by 80% last year, just in the month of May, directly because of social media. So a few other kind of points of context to help people understand. People equate any sort of Jewish culture with Israel. So even if someone posts a very simple post about having Shabbat dinner, having the Sabbath dinner on a Friday night, let's say a celebrity posts it, half of their comments will say Free Palestine. And can you imagine if someone who came from a Chinese background posted and said, oh, here's a traditional Chinese dinner that my parents made me, and all of the comments were, free Tibet, you terrible person, you don't care about other human beings. I mean, it's the same thing. We are American Jews who are Americans, and we obviously don't have any control over the policy decisions of the Israeli government or anything that's happening over there. But that's what social media does, is it gets rid of that lack of nuance, and it causes situations like that. And then on a practical note, I'll say that AJC works very closely with all of the social media companies. So Meta, otherwise known as Facebook and Instagram, we work with Twitter, we work with TikTok, and we help to inform their policies on what constitutes hate speech against Jews. And so I will say that the companies are trying, they care, but we have a long way to go. And one of the issues that has come up from this is that the companies are using algorithms to try to ban hate speech. But the problem is that when Jewish people post just typical Jewish content, the algorithm often flags it as Jewish hate speech. So they get rid of that content. So you have this problem where there's a lot of hate speech against Jews on Instagram or the other platforms, but then the positive Jewish content is also getting blocked. So that's been problematic.
So social media by itself has really contributed to great polarism in our society. While it is not just a tool that's used by our teens, we know that many of our teens are using social media. So Kelly, when you engage with our teens and they're seeing all this stuff about all the isms in our society that creates distance, how do you help them through Life Teens see that there isn't a danger in embracing someone who is different than them?
Simply put, in a simple answer, we talk about it. Often we are fearful of things that, what or who or things that we don't know and aren't familiar with. And so talking about it starts this conversation. Last fall, we offered programming that addressed the sinful reality of both anti-Semitism, of racism, discrimination, and we gave them scripture, doctoral, different resources that empowers the teens to go out, to not be a bystander, to stand up. It empowers them with self-awareness, with empathy. It empowers them with a reality and an eye to see what this world is and to call out that sin, to not just stand by and to ultimately love. And the feedback that we even got from that programming wasn't anything that we said from a microphone. It wasn't anything that we said to them. It was the conversations in their groups, in their small groups, because it started that conversation. It gave and provided an environment that they felt safe to just have dialogue about it. So that when they do walk in their school hallways, when they turn on TikTok and they start scrolling through things, they are able to call out the reality of this world, which unfortunately has that root in that sin, in that anti-Semitic type of way. So just starting a thing, just conversation.
It's not a just though, Kelly, I'm telling you, I spend a lot of time with adults who can't have those difficult conversations. So thank you for what you're doing. So Sam, you spend a lot of time with school districts. You talk about all of these issues. Tell us a little bit about the themes that you're discussing around those tables.
So when you meet with educational folks, the first thing they look to is the state curriculum. And we have curricula pages for everything, more than you could ever handle in a 180-day school year. So there's about 5 or 6 pages on the Holocaust. But if you read 5 or 6 pages, you don't really think either a student or an adult has a clue about the Holocaust. 6 million Jews died, 6 million non-Jews died. You can go to Pastor Niemöller's, famous poem, First They Went After the Socialists, etc. That doesn't teach it. when you look at the videos of the folks that were freed from the concentration camps, you get a view, thank goodness for Eisenhower. When you have a survivor talk to your group, you get a view of what it was like. It's very similar, frankly, to what's going on in Ukraine right now. You can't read a front page story on the HAC and think that you have a clue about genocide. But if you see a video of hundreds of people that were shot and thrown into a mass grave, then you have a much better idea of what genocide is, right? So one of the things that we've discussed is that whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Rwanda, print on a piece of paper is not educating our youth or our adults. It needs to be visual. It needs to be much more. So one of the things, for instance, that the Cobb School District is looking at is how do they make this more real than words on a page. And the school district, frankly, is very cognizant of the fact that they need to do a much better job with regard to all intolerance. So at the beginning when I talked about Hispanics, African Americans, LGBT, Asian Americans, Muslims, they understand you need to teach all of it, right? You need to teach all of it, and it can't be words on a page. So that's one of the first things they're frankly learning now is curricula on a printed sheet of paper isn't worth much. But the good news is the school system wants to change and make a difference.
Sam, I'm going to ask you a follow-up. We talked a little bit about it, and I mentioned that word discomfort at the beginning, and you mentioned it when we talked the last time. So many of our school districts, however, are being challenged, that is going to upset children. How do we increase the courage so that we can face it and really learn from it?
So that's a type of DEI issue also. I do a lot of work with ADL, Anti-Defamation League. I'm not only on their board, but I help them at the Capitol. And there were 4 or 5 bills this last session dealing with teaching in classrooms, curriculum. I think the code word was divisive concepts, and whether a student feels anguish, guilt, despair, whatever. And some people say there are 2 Georgias. Yeah, there's really about 5. You live in one of them, which is half the state's population. But for many of these legislators, they honestly don't get your concern. They probably don't have a Catholic church anywhere near their area. They don't have a synagogue near them. They don't witness diversity. They don't understand the value of diversity. I'm not being critical of them. They don't have that educational experience. So they don't understand how different lifetime experiences alter one's opinion. So one of the challenges we have is reaching out to the other half of our state's population and discussing with them the need to appreciate more the differences among us and how people view those things differently. I mean, I was negotiating with legislators from North Georgia on how to make House Bill 1084 more objective than subjective. Because the more a bill is subjective, the more teachers are going to be scared that they're going to get in trouble. So I'd say we got a lot of changes, but at the end of the day, it's still a bad bill. It's just a bad bill that's going to be the law of the state, right? But we need to understand the need for those diversity discussions. You know, years ago when I chaired Cobb, we used to have an annual retreat every year in Brasstown Valley. You know, you just go up forever as if you're trying to find North Carolina and you get there. And at Young Harris, a Catholic church opened like 20 years ago. Some of you maybe have been there or whatever. And I would tease, okay, there's a Catholic church. Give it another decade, we'll have a synagogue up here. No synagogue yet. And still only one Catholic church. So you really need that diversity among the population to appreciate the discussion that needs to occur.
So Sam, as you were speaking, I was just thinking about the power that Kelly holds in her hand, because we send Life Team kids off to this all over the state. And so Kelly, how are you helping our kids go off, be amazing disciples of this message to truly love one another, even those who are not like us?
I learned a lot of lessons from my parents, and probably most of them, my mother would argue, one in one ear, not want the other. I learned more probably unintentionally by her leading by example. So things that she did, not necessarily things even that she tried to like sit down and teach me, but things that she just said in her normal daily life. So things I picked up, I lose my keys like her, I say things I'm turning into my mother, but we learn by example, right? And so it's the same thing with any kids or any children, anything, like they learn by example, from their parents to their teachers to coaches to people they see in the grocery store. Like they learn all these things by what they see and what they witness. Like the way to combat that is teaching them by example. And by our example, we can teach them to love. So the things that we do, our actions, our words, how we react to the media, what we look at social media, how we respond to things, that makes a big impact. So ultimately, leading by example and learning to love well ourselves will help them to do so as well.
It's really powerful because we don't always think that people are watching, or like you said, Mom didn't always think that you were paying attention, but you surely did. Let me see what questions you have. We've had a lot of prepared questions. What questions do you have? What would you like to ask our panel? Thank you.
Sam, can you speak to the type of legislation we have in Georgia to address hate crimes?
2 years ago, we finally passed hate crimes legislation. Once again, on behalf of the ADL, I was at the Capitol more than I ever wanted to be. But let's also acknowledge AJC was active, the Holocaust Commission was active, JFGA, NAACP, many other religious leaders around the state. And it really happened for two reasons. You know, at the time, we were one of 4 states that didn't have hate crimes legislation. It really happened for 2 reasons. So the dean of the Georgia legislature is Calvin Smyrie, an amazing African-American businessman from Columbus, Georgia, who the president has nominated to be the ambassador to the Dominican Republic. He has a way of making friends with everyone he meets. And over the years, he and our speaker, David Ralston, from Blue Ridge, way up north, where he sees as many black people up there as Jewish people, as many Catholic people, right? They became good friends. And Calvin convinced him it was really necessary. Georgia was too good of a state to not have a hate crimes law. The second thing that happened, thank goodness, is we have a very principled lieutenant governor. he's probably one of the few people at the Capitol that actually cares about policy more than he cares about politics, which is in short supply, right? Jeff Duncan is the real thing. Now, Jeff isn't running for re-election because, like some of us talking to you now, we're not Trumpers. Jeff got the very conservative wing of the Republican Party to stop and say, it's time to pass this bill. And it was the Speaker's leadership and the Lieutenant Governor's leadership that passed that bill. Now, was it an A bill? No, it was a B bill. But anyone in politics, one of the first lessons they need to learn is legislation is going to be iterative. You know, if you go for the home run, you strike out. If you go for a double, you make it the double. And the LGBTQ community, for instance, really was hoping to get a little more in the bill. But the head of Georgia Equality understood this was a double to a triple and you take it. So it passed because this really broad group of Georgians came together and they had the benefit of two solid leaders. Now, some of you may wonder, why am I not talking more about Democrats? It's simply because Democrats don't have the votes. There are a lot of really good Democrats in the Georgia legislature, but they don't have the votes to make the difference. So you needed conservative Republicans to say, it's time. We need to do it. So we, as a state, can frankly feel proud of the fact that now there's 3. But we're no longer one of the 4. And that was a really good day for Georgia.
Thanks, Sam. What other questions do you have? Yes.
How do we recognize the difference between ignorance and true hate? And how do we find out?
Well. Yes, his question was, how do we tell the difference between ignorance and true hate, and how do we respond to that? Yes, please. Yes, Julie.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Personally, I believe that 99% of hateful comments are ignorant, because if you're spewing hate, then you haven't had the ability to be around people who are different from you, or the ability to develop that understanding. So to err on the side of caution, I would say if you have a friend who makes a anti-Semitic or racist comment, don't shame them, because that's actually what pushes people more into extremism. So what you do is you say, hey, I heard you make that comment. I just want to let you know that this is actually what it means. Wasn't sure if you knew that. Do you want to talk about it more? And give them an open invitation to have that conversation. So I'm a really big believer in educating as opposed to calling out. If we want to bring people in, then we have to approach situations with humility. So I would say that's actually the biggest thing, is that we all need to work on developing our sense of humility, and also not being a victim of this outrage culture that we have, because there are a lot of outrageous and bad things going on. It's easy to get mad and offended, but it's a lot more difficult to actually take a step back and say, well, this is an opportunity as opposed to a time to be frustrated or angry.
And once again, doing this is not easy. These difficult conversations are difficult for a reason, right? Emotions are high and opinions are different, and there's a lot at stake. So there's things that we can do to really get comfortable with it. Looks like Sam wants to say something. Pick up the mic. No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Look, the kid at Pope, he was ignorance. He wasn't hate. He showed up to one of the meetings we had with leadership of the Cobb School District with his dad. And he was very sincere and very ashamed of what he had done. The school district has not reversed his punishment. His punishment was not mild. He's out of school. He had met with a Holocaust survivor. At his father's request, he had to read a whole bunch of literature, movies, etc. And he was very sincere that he's learned from his mistake, but the mistake will live with him. It's on his public school record. So just like Julie said, always err on the side of that it's ignorance, it's not hate. You know, I've seen hate. It's few times. It's really ignorance. Second thing I would say, just to get y'all thinking a little bit. When I was in college, a group of us decided every week we were going to go to another place of worship. So it was about 10 of us. One week we went to a Catholic church. When we went to, you know, in DC, of course, you go to the cathedral. Beautiful, beautiful building. One week we went to the synagogue. One week we went to a Quaker. One week we went to a mosque. It wasn't a regular mosque service. That wouldn't have been permitted, but we met with folks, etc. I would encourage a small group of of Cobb places of worship to invite their children to have that experience. It once again teaches you how alike we are rather than how diverse, you know. We all want the best for our family. We all want the best for our community. Catholics, oh my God, Catholic parents, do you really think there's a big difference between a Catholic mom and a Jewish mom? They both drive their kids crazy, right? So getting folks from different faiths to witness and to learn is really invaluable.
Thank you so much. You know, Father Ray opened in prayer, and amongst the things that he said, we're praying for hope. So I'd like to start with Melanie and ask you as we close this evening, and ask every panelist to answer the same question. What do you hope for?
I hope that in this post-COVID era that we kind of set aside the levels of rhetoric and political strife that we've seen and begin to really listen to each other again. I think we've gotten so far away from that, so nights like tonight are so important. And most importantly, just listening with an open mind. And for hope for Pope, after the Pope Team Up to Cleanup event, I really walked away with a sense of hope, that to see the community come out and really have a love for the school and work together to make a difference, that really gave me a sense of hope.
Wonderful. Thank you. Julie.
Intergroup opportunities. That is the biggest thing I hope for, because I've had so many of them, and I'm so grateful to my parents who are sitting in the audience, hey Mom and Dad, who were adamant that I experienced opportunities and things that put me out of my comfort zone and let me learn about others. So I hope that every parent in this room and every person who may be a parent one day will keep that at the forefront of their minds.
Thank you. Kelly?
For me, it's exposure. I feel like hey Mom, I feel like I should acknowledge my mother now, thanks. After I made fun of her. For me, it's exposure and just simply put, just peace, which isn't simple at all, but yet just peace. And I hope that we are able to live in the diverse beauty of what this world has to offer, and that in that we are able to love and just respect everyone.
So I was at I went to a lot of boring meetings as Attorney General. Just think about it, you know, they could put you to sleep really fast. So we went to Greenbrier for an Attorney General meeting, and while we were there, we saw that Jerry West was there. Now I know the young folks, none of you have a clue who Jerry West is, right? Okay. Probably one of the best basketball players ever. He's from West Virginia. And he happened to be there. They have some great golf courses. And some of the AGs asked if he would talk one lunch when we didn't have a pre-scheduled speaker to talk to the group. And you know, we all have our YP talk, right? Young professional talk. We've all given those YP talks countless times, right? I don't need notes. And Jerry West's YP talk was this. Everyone's going to tell you you need to hire the best and the brightest. That in order for you to be successful, they need to be brighter than you. They don't need to be yes people. They need to be people who challenge you, and that will make you better. Jerry West said, forget that nonsense. What you need is to hire kind people, nice people. If we make it a life's mission to only be around nice people, then we will have a much better life.
Thank you. And my hope is that tonight is the beginning of many, many dialogues through which we learn together. And I want you to join me in thanking this amazing panel. And let me turn it over to Rabbi Dan. Is it not you? John, sorry. None of us are looking at our agenda tonight, are we? Sorry, John.
Thank you very much. This is a reading of Psalm 121. I raise my eyes toward the mountains. From whence shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to slip, or your guardian to sleep. Behold, the guardian of Israel never slumbers nor sleeps. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. By the day, the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all evil. He will guard your soul. The Lord will guard your coming and going, both now and forever.
So I stand up here this evening so full of gratitude, my heart full of gratitude, not only for everyone who participated in our panel. Thank you to the folks at St. Anne's, to my dear colleague, Father Ray, for his wisdom and guidance in allowing this to happen each and every year, to Steve Dex for his eloquent remarks, to our men's club who have provided yellow candles that you can take home and light tonight on your own outside the door in memory of the 6 million. But also in gratitude for our two communities having come together. I'm going to speak just only very briefly for a moment, followed by two closing prayers. But I would be remiss if I didn't close with this, one of my favorite stories from the Hasidic tradition, about a man who was one day lost in the woods. And so the man is lost in the woods, trying to find his way out, looking to the left, to the right, not sure where to go, when he encounters another man who is also lost in the woods. And he says one to the other, "Brother, do you know where you are?" And the other says, "No, I have no idea where we are, but here's what I can tell you. I've looked to the left, and I know that's not the way to go. I've looked to the right, and I also know that that is not the way to go. But let us join hands and walk together in the woods, for at least we can be lost together as we try to find our way out." It's hard to fathom on a night where we mark the loss of 6 million Jews. As we look out at the world at large right now, the Ukraine, so many other things continuing to happen, it's hard to fathom to think about the fact that we are still lost. So much of what we heard today, a statistic that just came out in the news today, by the way, from the Anti-Defamation League, 133%. That is the percentage of rise of anti-Semitic events in Georgia between 2021 and 2022. It is hard for us to fathom all of these things. And yet I am granted great comfort in knowing that here we are lost in the woods together, with great friends by our side, so that eventually when we do find our way out, we will be with wonderful friends who will have been with us all of the way. And with that in mind, I'd like to invite everyone to please rise. In just a moment, we will recite the El Male Rachamim Memorial Prayer in memory of the 6 million. El Male Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina B'ma'alot Kedoshim Utorim Kezohar HaKiyamazhirim Et Nishmot Kol Acheinu B'nei Yisrael Anashim Nashim V'Tahaf Shenehergu V'Neshenitbechu V'Shenisrefu V'Shenechneku Al Kiddush Hashem Began Eden Zemenuchatam Ahana Balarachamim Astirem Beseter Knafecha Leolamim Utzror Bitzror Achaim Et Nishmotehem Adonai Hu Nachalatam Ve'yanuchu V'Shalom Al Mishkevotehem Venomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the souls of all of our brethren, men, women, and children, the house of Israel, Jews, non-Jews alike, who were slaughtered and burned during the Shoah. May their memories endure, inspiring truth and loyalty in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. May they rest in peace. Adonai is their portion. And let us all say, Amen. As for our concluding prayer this evening, it will be one that continues to resonate each and every year that we recite it. We will conclude with the Mourner's Kaddish. And in between each of the Aramaic words in which we magnify and sanctify God's holy name, we are reminded of the names of various concentration camps. You know, it's so interesting, Babi Yar, which has been in the news recently, where the Holocaust memorial was bombed in the Ukraine. So many different places, sites of terrorism against Jews and others throughout our history. Yit Gadal, Kishinev, Veyit Kadash, Warsaw, Shemei Rabbah, Auschwitz, Be'alma Divra, Chirute, Dachau, Ve'amlich Malchute, Buchenwald, Bechayechon, Uvyomechon, Babayar, Uvchaye, Dechol Beit Yisrael, Baghdad, Bagala, Uvizman, Kariv, Chevron, Ve'imru, Amen. Yehe Shmei Rabba Mivarach, Shalom u'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach kfar Etzion. V'yitpa'ar v'yitromam mayans. V'yitnaseh v'yithadar Terezin. V'yitale v'yithalal Treblinka. Shemei Dukudisha Brichu Bergen Belsen. Lehela Vilna. Min kol birchata v'shirata usha. Tushbechata v'nechemata masada. Damiran be'alma Jerusalem. Ve'imru amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya. Ve'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imru amen. As in all solemn Jewish gatherings, we conclude with those final words of the Kaddish, Oseh shalom bimromav. May the one who brings forth peace from the heavens, Hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. May he bring peace among us, among the house of Israel, and the whole world. And together let us all say, Amen. We thank you for joining us tonight. This concludes our service.
We would like to invite you over to stick around.
Stick around.
There's some wonderful kosher goodies. We'd love to be able to share together as well as continue to share conversations. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Father. You didn't buy those goods on Passover, did you? Just checking. God bless you all. Thank you for being here.